The people who dismissed you never saw your real assignment. Not because they were blind, not because they were stupid, not because they weren't paying attention. They dismissed you because what was growing inside of you was never meant for their eyes. Let that sit for a moment. Because what you're about to hear in the next few minutes is going to reframe every rejection, every disappointment, every moment someone looked at you and decided you weren't enough. And it is going to explain something you have felt your entire life but could never quite put into words. You sensed something was different about you before anyone ever told you. You felt it in rooms where everyone else seemed comfortable, and you felt like you were watching from somewhere outside the glass. You felt it in conversations where people were satisfied with surface-level living and something deep in you was screaming that there had to be more. You felt it in the quiet moments in the 3 a.m. silences when you lay there with more questions than answers and the universe felt like it was pressing down on your chest, asking something of you that no one around you seemed to be asked. You weren't imagining it. And I need you to stay with me because by the end of this you are going to understand why every single person who ever underestimated you was actually doing exactly what heaven needed them to do. Part 1, the dismissal. There is something deeply painful about being seen and being dismissed at the same time. And I want to go there with you because most people will skip over the pain too quickly. They'll say their loss or you'll show them and they'll move on. But I'm not going to do that to you. Because the wound of being underestimated by people who were supposed to see you, that wound is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged before it can be transformed. Think about the first time it happened. Maybe you were young. Maybe you brought an idea to someone you trusted, a parent, a teacher, a mentor, and instead of meeting your enthusiasm, they gave you a look. You know the look, the slight smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the careful tone that says that's nice but maybe think smaller. The silence that followed that was louder than anything they could have said. You felt something crack inside of you in that moment, not shatter, not break, crack. Like a fault line forming that you would carry for years without fully understanding why certain things hurt more than they should, why certain words landed harder than they should, why the approval of certain people mattered more than you wanted it to. And here's what nobody told you about that crack. It wasn't weakness forming inside of you. It was depth. Every time you were dismissed, every time someone looked at your dreams with bored eyes, every time your vision was reduced to something manageable and ordinary by someone who couldn't hold the size of what you were carrying, you didn't become smaller. You went deeper. You were forced inward. You were forced to go to places inside yourself that most people never visit because most people never had to. You sensed this before anyone told you. You knew that the dismissal was doing something to you. You just didn't know what. Now you're going to find out. Revelation 1, why they couldn't see it here is the first thing that will change how you see your entire story. The people who underestimated you were not seeing reality incorrectly. They were seeing reality correctly, they just couldn't see all of it. They were looking at the seed and calling it small, not understanding they were standing in front of a forest. Think about this carefully. A seed in its natural state gives no indication of what it will become. You cannot look at a seed and see a redwood. You cannot look at a seed and see fruit. You cannot look at a seed and see shelter or shade or the oxygen that people will breathe decades from now. The seed simply looks like a seed. And to someone who has never understood the science of growth, a seed is just a small, unremarkable thing sitting in dirt. You were the seed. And the people who underestimated you were not botanists. They were ordinary observers. They saw what was visible. They evaluated what was measurable. They judged what was presentable. And what was presentable about you in those seasons was not the full picture. You weren't fully formed yet. Your gifts hadn't fully revealed themselves. The assignment heaven had placed on your life wasn't yet legible in any language that ordinary eyes could read. This explains something that never made sense to you, doesn't it? Why the most spiritually average people in your life seem to have the loudest opinions about your potential. Why the people who had settled for the least were the quickest to suggest you should also settle. Why the people who never took risks had the most urgent warnings about yours. You cannot see in someone else what you have never been willing to see in yourself. They weren't projecting malice onto you. They were projecting their own limitations. Their dismissal was never a verdict about your future. It was a confession about their ceiling. And heaven, in its infinite wisdom, allowed you to be surrounded by people with low ceilings precisely so that you would stop letting other people's ceilings become your floor. But there is something more, something deeper than this, something that will require you to sit very still to receive. Heaven didn't just allow you to be underestimated, heaven used it. Part 2, the hidden strategy. Stay with me here because this is where things get spiritually significant. There is a principle that most people never discover because it only reveals itself through the kind of pain that drives you to search for meaning in the dark. And the principle is this: the most powerful things in the universe grow in secret, not in obscurity by accident, in hiddenness by design. Think about the most powerful forces in nature. Roots grow underground where no one can see them, and they do their most critical work in complete darkness. Gold exists under thousands of feet of rock and pressure, completely invisible to the surface world. Diamonds form under conditions of extreme heat and crushing weight, in places no human eye can penetrate over timelines that exceed human comprehension. The most powerful storms on Earth begin not with thunder and lightning, but with a quiet convergence of pressure systems that no one notices until the full force arrives. You felt this. You felt yourself growing in places where no one could see it happening. Those years of reading that no one knew about. Those hours you spent developing a skill that no one applauded. Those nights you wrestled with questions that no one around you was even asking. Those private disciplines, those secret prayers, those solitary walks where you were holding conversations with something larger than yourself, working something out inside your soul that would have taken most people decades to even begin approaching. And all of this happened while people looked at you and saw nothing remarkable. This is not coincidence. This is not bad luck. This is not the universe forgetting about you. This is what happens when heaven is serious about someone's assignment. Because here is what you need to understand about preparation. Real preparation requires privacy. When something is being prepared for greatness, it cannot be exposed prematurely. If a seed breaks the surface of the soil before its root system is deep enough, the very sunlight that was meant to feed it will destroy it. If wine is uncorked before fermentation is complete, it is undrinkable. If a bone is loaded with weight before it has healed and densified, it will fracture under the very pressure it was designed to eventually carry. Your hiddenness was not punishment, it was protection. And the people who underestimated you, they were the reason you stayed hidden long enough to become what you needed to become. Their dismissal kept you out of spotlights you weren't ready for. Their doubt kept you in the rooms of private development where the real work was happening. Their inability to see you meant you weren't performing for an audience when you should have been perfecting your craft. Only a chosen one understands this feeling, the feeling of doing the real work in private, of becoming in secret, of knowing something is growing inside of you even when no one around you can see any evidence of it. Part 3, the ONES who left. There's something else I need to talk to you about. Something that may have hurt more than the dismissal itself. The ones who left, not the strangers who never saw your potential. Not the colleagues who underestimated your capacity, but the people who were close to you, the ones who had your trust, the friends who disappeared when the season shifted, the relationships that simply stopped making sense, the people who were there during one chapter and then without a dramatic goodbye simply weren't there anymore. You wondered if you did something wrong. You replayed conversations trying to find the moment where it all went sideways. You checked yourself, you questioned yourself. You sat with the silence they left behind and tried to make meaning of it, tried to understand why people who were supposed to stay didn't. What if I told you that some of those departures were not accidents? Not all of them. Some people leave because of genuine dysfunction, genuine incompatibility, genuine hurt. But some people left your life because they were only ever assigned to a specific chapter of your story. And heaven, which sees the full book when you can only see a single page, orchestrated their exit because what is coming next in your story requires a different cast. Think about this carefully. Every new level of your life requires a new version of your relationships. The friends you need when you are surviving are not always the friends you need when you are building. The community that sustains you in your darkest season may not be capable of carrying the weight of your brightest one. Some people in your life were connected to a version of you that is no longer who you are, and they were released not as a punishment to you, but as an act of mercy on both sides. But there is something even more significant happening here. Some people left because they could feel something changing in you that they could not explain. You didn't change in any way they could articulate. You didn't become arrogant or distant or unavailable. But something in the atmosphere around you shifted. Something in the frequency you were operating on began to move beyond what they could tune into. And rather than grow with you, rather than stretch toward what you were becoming, they made the unconscious decision to create distance. You felt it before they acted on it. You sensed this. You noticed the conversations getting shallower. You noticed the enthusiasm they had for your ideas cooling. You noticed yourself editing what you said, what you dreamed out loud, what you revealed about where you were going, because you could feel that who you were becoming was somehow threatening to who they needed you to remain. This is what others could not understand, that your growth was not a betrayal of who you had been. But to people who are not growing, someone else's growth can feel like abandonment. It can feel like a silent accusation. It can feel like you have suddenly decided you are better than them, even when nothing of the sort is happening. You were not leaving them, you were becoming, and they could not tell the difference. Revelation 2, the envy that never made sense, and this brings me to something that has probably confused you for years. Why did certain people you never competed with, people you never threatened, people you actively tried to support, why did certain people hold something against you that you could never quite name? You felt it. A coldness that had no origin story. A resistance that seemed to predate any conflict. A subtle undermining, a quiet dismissal, a refusal to celebrate you that came from people who had no obvious reason for it. You probably blamed yourself for a long time. You probably searched for what you had done to deserve it. Here is the revelation. They were responding to something they could not see but could feel. The anointing on someone's life is invisible, but it is not unfelt. There is something that exists around people who carry a genuine assignment, a weight, an authority, a frequency that other people sense on an almost subconscious level. And some people, when they encounter it, respond with openness and recognition. But other people, particularly people who carry unresolved pain or unfulfilled potential in themselves, respond with something closer to threat. They couldn't celebrate you because your existence reminded them of something they had not yet become. They couldn't support you because your progress in the direction of your calling made audible the voice in them that was asking why they hadn't moved in theirs. They couldn't be happy for you because your joy and your purpose was a mirror they couldn't look at without discomfort. This explains so much about your life that never made sense, doesn't it? Why the people with the least generosity toward you were often people who seemed to have everything they needed to be at peace. Why the resistance didn't come from people who were obviously suffering, it came from people who looked fine from the outside but were inwardly unfulfilled. Why the envy, the cold shoulders, the subtle sabotage, why it never had a logical origin story that you could trace. It wasn't about you. It was never about. It was about what you represent to anyone who looks at you and feels, beneath the logic of their conscious mind, that they are in the presence of someone who actually knows what they are here to do. Most people will never experience this. Most people will never carry the kind of assignment that provokes this kind of invisible response. But you do, and you have felt it your whole life without being able to explain it. Now you can. Part 4, the years that felt wasted. Let me take you somewhere that requires a little courage to go. The years that felt wasted. You know which ones I'm talking about. The period, or maybe periods, where nothing seemed to be moving, where the prayers felt like they were going nowhere, where the effort didn't seem to produce proportional results. Where you watched people around you advancing and you stood still, or felt like you were moving backward, and you asked the question that maybe you never said out loud to anyone: is there something wrong with me? And here is where I need to be very precise, because what I'm about to say is going to either confirm something you've secretly believed or shatter something you've secretly feared. There was nothing wrong with you. The delay was not discipline. The delay was not punishment. The delay was not evidence that you had misread your calling or mistaken your gifts or overestimated your assignment. The delay was weight training. Think about what an athlete does in the months before competition. They don't compete, they train. They endure repetitions that no one applauds. They build muscle memory in movements that will not be needed until the moment everything is on the line. They develop endurance through distances that have no audience. They make themselves capable of things they cannot yet do, not because they are being punished, but because they are being prepared for a level of performance that their current body cannot sustain. Heaven was doing this with your character. What you were being prepared for, the level of impact, the magnitude of the assignment, the scope of what your life is moving toward, it required a character that could not be built in comfort. It required a faith that could only be developed by walking through situations where faith was the only thing you had. It required a compassion for human suffering that could only come from having suffered in ways that gave you genuine understanding. It required a resilience that could only be forged in the furnace of repeated disappointment, repeated delay, repeated invitation to quit. You built things during those years that you cannot see yet. You don't have a ledger that shows you the inventory of what accumulated inside you during those seasons that felt empty, but it accumulated. Every day you chose not to give up was a deposit. Every morning you got up and did the work when no one was watching was a deposit. Every moment you chose integrity over compromise, depth over performance, authenticity over the approval you were craving. Every single one of those moments was building something in you that cannot be purchased, cannot be borrowed, cannot be imitated, and cannot be destroyed. You just couldn't see it happening. And that is the most disorienting thing about divine preparation. It does not show you what it is building while it is building it. It asks you to keep going without evidence. It asks you to trust the process before the process shows its results. It asks you to believe in the harvest during the winter when the ground is frozen and nothing is visible above the surface and every piece of visible evidence says nothing is alive. But something was alive. Something has always been alive in you. You felt it. Even in your darkest seasons, there was something in you that would not fully die. Something that kept reaching for a reason. Something that kept insisting, even when logic argued against it, that the story was not over, that there was more. That giving up was not the answer, even when every piece of evidence suggested it should be. That something was not stubbornness. That something was not delusion. That something was the seed of your destiny refusing to be buried permanently by the conditions it was planted in. Revelation 3, the major reframe, this is the central revelation of the entire script. Deliver it slowly. Let it breathe. Everything you just read is leading here. And I need you to receive this carefully because it is going to change how you see your entire past, not just a chapter of it, but all of it. The things that were done to you that hurt the most were not the enemy's greatest attacks on your life. They were the universe's greatest investments in it. I know that sounds like something that is easy to say from the outside. I know it sounds like the kind of thing people say to make pain sound more acceptable. But stay with me for a moment because I want to show you the architecture of this. I want to show you why it is structurally, psychologically, and spiritually true, not just emotionally comforting. Think about the specific things that caused you the most pain, the specific rejections, the specific betrayals, the specific losses, the specific seasons of isolation, the specific moments where the ground fell out from underneath you and you didn't know how you were going to keep standing. Now consider, what would you know that you do not know if those things had not happened? Not what would you feel, not what would have been easier. What would you know? If no one had ever rejected you, you would not know how to speak to the rejected. If you had never been betrayed, you would not have the particular kind of discernment you now carry about character and trust. If you had never been isolated, you would not have developed the relationship with yourself and with God that is now the foundation of everything you are building. If you had never suffered loss, you would not know how to hold space for the losses of others in a way that is genuine rather than performative. The very things that hurt you became the very things that make you different from everyone else in your field, in your calling, in your assignment. This is what others could not understand, that your wounds were not liabilities, they were credentials. The pain that tried to disqualify you was actually creating the qualifications that no institution could confer, that no mentor could teach, that no network could provide, that no amount of external success could replace. Your suffering was not accidental curriculum. It was specific. It was tailored. It was designed with a precision that should take your breath away to develop in you exactly what your assignment requires. And the people who caused that suffering, they thought they were responding to you. They thought they were making choices based on their own preferences and opinions and fears. But they were unwitting participants in a design they could not see and were not powerful enough to understand. The rejection that broke your heart cracked you open in a way that allowed something greater to enter. The betrayal that made you question everyone taught you to discern in a way that most people never learn until it is too late. The loss that left you empty created a spaciousness in you that you will one day fill with purpose in ways that would have been impossible if you had remained full of what you had before. Everything suddenly makes sense, doesn't it? Not in a way that makes it stop hurting. Not in a way that makes you glad it happened. but in a way that finally allows the pain to have a purpose, in a way that finally lets you stop carrying the weight of believing that the worst chapters of your story were mistakes. They were not mistakes, not a single one. Part 5, the isolation. Let me talk about the loneliness now. The specific kind of loneliness that only a person with your kind of awareness carries, not the loneliness of being alone. Many people are alone and are not lonely. And many people are surrounded by others and are deeply lonely in a way that the presence of bodies in the room cannot fix. You know this kind of loneliness. You have sat in rooms full of people and felt it. You have laughed in conversations and felt it beneath the laughter. You have been loved by people who cared about you deeply and still felt it, the particular ache of not being fully known, of being valued for a version of yourself that is smaller than what you actually are. This loneliness has a name. It is the loneliness of the unrecognized, and it is one of the most specific and particular experiences of a person walking toward a significant assignment. Because here is the thing about your kind of awareness. It is not evenly distributed. The way you see the world, the way you process experience, the way you sense things before they are visible and feel things before they are explainable, this is not the common experience. Most people move through life on the surface. They feel what is directly in front of them. They process what is immediately apparent. They respond to what is visible and measurable and concrete. You have never been able to do that. You have always felt the layers beneath the surface. You have always sensed the undercurrents beneath the conversation. You have always known things you could not explain, felt things you could not justify, seen things coming that no one else was watching for. And because you could not always explain how you knew what you knew, because the evidence for your perceptions was often invisible to others, you have spent a great deal of your life either dimming yourself to fit into rooms or leaving rooms where you could not breathe. This is isolating in a way that is very difficult to describe to someone who does not experience it. Because the loneliness is not about being rejected by others exactly. It is about the almost impossible task of finding people who exist at the same frequency, who feel the weight of things the way you feel it, who are asking the same questions you are asking, who care about the things you care about with the same kind of urgency that you feel. You have met some of these people, not many, but enough to know that they exist, enough to know that the connection is possible, enough to know that the problem was not that you were too much, it was that you were in the wrong rooms. And the isolation that felt like punishment was actually doing something. It was developing in you a relationship with your own interiority that most people never build because they never had to. When you can't find your fullness in the room you're in, you learn to find it in yourself. When no one around you can meet you where you actually are, you learn to go deeper into where you are and find the resource that was always there, but that you would have never found if you had always had adequate company. Your deepest strength is a product of your deepest loneliness. Most people will never experience this. Most people will never be forced far enough inward to discover what is there. They will live their entire lives at the surface, adequately entertained, adequately connected, never having to descend into the depths of their own soul because the crowd always gave them somewhere else to look. You descended, you were forced to. And in the depths, you found something that the surface can never give. You found yourself, the real self. Not the performed self, not the adapted self, not the self that was shaped by other people's comfort and other people's expectations, but the self that exists underneath all of that. The self that knows what it is here to do, the self that carries the actual assignment. And that self, the one you found in your loneliest seasons, is the most powerful thing about you. Revelation 4, why God kept you hidden. There's a question you may have asked heaven directly, maybe in prayer. Maybe in the silent conversation you have with something larger than yourself in those moments when you don't have any language left. Why did you keep me hidden for so long? Why did you let other people's stars rise while mine seemed to stall? Why did you allow people with less depth, less integrity, less genuine calling to occupy stages and platforms and positions while I remained in the background? Why did you give me a vision and then seemingly do nothing to bring it to pass? Why did you show me what I could be and then appear to withhold the means to get there? I am going to answer that question now. And the answer is going to be uncomfortable before it becomes liberating. Heaven kept you hidden because the version of you that was ready to be seen was not yet the version of you that could steward what being seen was going to bring. This requires you to be very honest with yourself. Think about the you from 5 years ago, 3 years ago, even 1 year ago. Think about where that person's heart was, how that person handled criticism, how that person responded to setback, how that person managed the opinions of others, how that person's identity was constructed and what it was built on. Now think about what would have happened if that version of you had received the recognition you were asking for. Not in a self-critical way, in an honest way, because recognition is not just a reward. Recognition is a weight. Visibility is not just a gift. Visibility is a target. Success is not just an outcome. Success is a test that reveals what was always there but was never under pressure enough to show itself. If you had received the platform before you had the foundation, the platform would have cracked you. If you had received the recognition before you had the identity to stand in it, the recognition would have built you on sand, on the applause of others, on the validation of strangers, on a performance rather than a presence. And the moment the applause paused, the moment the validation shifted, the moment the performance couldn't sustain itself, you would have fallen from a height that would have been very difficult to recover from. Heaven was protecting you from a version of success that would have cost you the things you cannot afford to lose. And in the years that felt hidden, heaven was doing the most important work, the work of building your foundation, your character. The unshakable knowing of who you are that does not require the confirmation of anyone outside of you. The faith that is not dependent on circumstances. The peace that is not contingent on outcomes. The identity that is rooted in something so deep that no amount of failure or betrayal or disappointment can reach it. You are being built for the kind of visibility that will not destroy you. And the people who got visibility before their foundations were ready, watch carefully. Not with judgment, not with satisfaction, but with understanding. Because the ones who rise before they are ready eventually fall in ways that confirm exactly why the timing of your rising matters. You sensed this before anyone told you. You felt, even when you were frustrated by the delay, that something would have been wrong if it had happened before now. You felt, even when you wanted to argue with the pace of your own unfolding, that something in the slowness was significant. It was. It is. Part 6, the specific gift of being underestimated. Now I want to give you something that you can carry with you. Being underestimated is not just something that happened to you. It is something that gave you something that cannot be acquired any other way. The first thing it gave you is the gift of invisibility at the right time. When you are underestimated, people do not watch you closely. They do not scrutinize your process. They do not monitor your development with the pressure of their expectations. You were allowed to grow in the freedom of low expectations, which is actually one of the most valuable conditions for genuine growth. The people who were expected to be great from the beginning had audiences for their learning curve. Every stumble was noticed, every failure was analyzed, every moment of uncertainty was interpreted as evidence of the limits of their potential. But you were allowed to fail quietly. You were allowed to experiment without anyone watching to see if it worked. You were allowed to develop your gifts in the low-pressure environment of other people's disinterest. This is a gift. It does not feel like a gift, but it is. The second thing being underestimated gave you is the clarity of knowing why you are doing what you do. When no one expects anything of you, when no one is applauding your progress, when no one is offering you the validation that would make your work feel worthwhile from the outside, you are forced to find your motivation from the inside. And the people who find their motivation from the inside are the ones who keep going when everyone else stops. Because the people who are motivated by applause quit when the applause disappears. But the people who learn to be moved by something internal, by a calling, by a purpose, by the simple and unshakable sense that this is what they are supposed to do, those people are unstoppable. You became one of those people because no one gave you the option of external motivation to fall back on. The third gift, and this is the one that will serve you the most, being underestimated means that when you do emerge, you will emerge as something no one can argue with. Because you will not come with the fragile confidence of someone who was always told they were great. You will come with the tested, tried, forged in fire confidence of someone who kept going without proof, who built without applause, who believed without confirmation. And that kind of confidence has a quality to it that is immediately perceptible to anyone who encounters it. It is not performed. It is not borrowed. It cannot be imitated. It is the undeniable authority of someone who earned their way to certainty through genuine ordeal. The people who underestimated you never understood that they were building into you the exact qualities that would one day make you undeniable. Part 7, the season that is changing. I need you to pay very close attention now, because what I am about to say is not poetry. It is not encouragement for the sake of encouragement. It is a specific observation about where you are and what is happening around you that you may not be fully recognizing yet. Things are shifting, not in the dramatic, cinematic way that your mind may have imagined your breakthrough would look, not with trumpets and obvious announcements and doors flying open dramatically. Things are shifting the way seasons shift, gradually and then suddenly, and then in a way where you can't believe it took you so long to notice the new temperature. You have been feeling it, haven't you? A sense of something loosening, a sense of things that were stuck beginning to move, a sense of energy returning that had been absent for a long time, a sense that the conversations you have been having internally are about to begin happening externally, a sense that the preparation has a destination that is closer than it has ever been. This feeling is not wishful thinking. This is your spirit recognizing something your circumstances haven't fully shown you yet. Because here is what is true about divine timing. The breakthrough does not happen when the circumstances align. The breakthrough happens when the person is ready. And something in the way you have been walking through this season, the questions you have been asking, the depth you have been developing, the willingness you have shown to be honest with yourself and with heaven about where you actually are, something in all of that has been saying, this one is almost ready. And almost ready in heaven's timeline is very close to now. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to give you a promise that bypasses your participation. The season changing does not mean you sit down and wait for the door to open while you stand on the other side of it with your hands in your pockets. The season changing means that the efforts you make now will produce results in ways that your efforts in previous seasons did not. The conversations you initiate now will land differently than they would have before. The risks you take now are risks you are finally prepared to take in a way you weren't before. The ground is changing under your feet, and the work you do on changing ground produces different results than the work you did on frozen ground. This is the moment to act from a different posture than you have been acting from, not desperate, not grasping, but present, intentional, aligned, moving from the knowledge of who you are rather than the fear of who you might not be allowed to become. Revelation 5, what recognition actually looks like. Here is something that matters deeply, and I want you to hold it gently because it is both liberating and demanding. The recognition that is coming for you is not going to look like what you have been imagining. When we spend years being underestimated, when we spend years watching others receive the visibility and the credit and the acknowledgement that we did not receive, we can develop a picture in our minds of what vindication looks like. We imagine a moment where the people who doubted us witness our success and feel the appropriate amount of awe. We imagine a stage, a platform, a moment of undeniable arrival. We imagine a version of recognition that is, if we are honest, at least partially designed to be witnessed by the people who said we wouldn't make it. And I want to free you from that picture. Not because you don't deserve recognition, you do. Not because the vindication isn't real, it is. But because the recognition that is actually coming for you is bigger than anything that is about proving something to the people who underestimated you. True recognition is not a moment. It is a state. It is not a single event that changes everything at once. It is a series of encounters, of connections, of opening doors, of moments where the right person says the right thing and something that was private becomes public, and then it multiplies from there in ways you could not have engineered. And the most significant recognition will not come from the people who dismissed you. It will come from the people who needed you. From the people who have been in the dark and will experience your light as their first sight of a particular kind of dawn. From the people who have been asking questions that no one around them could answer, and who will encounter your presence or your work or your words and feel, with a shock of recognition that will take their breath away, that they have finally found someone who speaks their language. Those people are already out there. They are waiting without knowing they are waiting. They are searching without knowing exactly what they are searching for. And they are closer to finding you than you think. Part 8, the truth about your uniqueness. You have spent a significant portion of your life being told, in both overt and subtle ways, that what makes you different is a problem. Be more like this, be less like that, don't be so intense, don't be so sensitive, don't think so much, don't feel so deeply, don't ask so many questions, don't want so much, don't dream so big, don't be so much. And you tried, didn't you? You tried to be less. You tried to fit into shapes that were not made for you. You tried to lower the volume of the things that made you distinctive and turn up the volume of the things that made you more palatable to ordinary consumption, and it never worked. And it was never going to work, because what makes you different is not incidental to your assignment. It is not a personality quirk that heaven is going to need to work around in order to use you. It is not a liability that your gifts will have to overcome. What makes you different is your assignment. It is the specific configuration of your particular calling. It is the exact shape of the tool you are. The sensitivity that people told you was weakness, that is what will allow you to reach people that a less sensitive person cannot reach. The intensity that made people uncomfortable, that is the fuel that will drive you through the moments where ordinary motivation would have given out long ago. The way you think, the way you see, the way you feel, the way you experience the world with a kind of depth that most people find exhausting just to observe, none of that is an accident. None of that is a malfunction. All of that is intentional design. Heaven does not make errors in the architecture of a person's gifts. You were not supposed to be like everyone else. You were supposed to be exactly like you. And the people who tried to flatten you, to normalize you, to sand down the edges of what made you distinctive, they were not wrong about the fact that you are different. They were wrong about what different means. Different is not a flaw to be corrected. Different is a direction to be followed. The version of you that you have been apologizing for your entire life is the version of you that the world actually needs. Not a more acceptable version, not a more comfortable version, not a more palatable version. The actual, original, unfiltered, uncompromising version of you that has been waiting to be allowed to exist fully and without apology. That version of you has a destiny so specific that no one else can fulfill it. No one else with your exact combination of wounds and gifts and questions and passions and perceptions and experiences. No one else who has walked exactly the road you have walked and arrived exactly where you are standing right now. The uniqueness that was underestimated is the uniqueness that is irreplaceable. Part 9, the assignment ahead. I want to talk to you about what is in front of you because the past is important, understanding it is important, but you were not built to live in it. You were built to move forward from it. What is ahead of you is not small. I say that not to pressure you, not to add weight to what you already carry, but to free you from the habit of planning for small, the habit of hoping for modest. The habit of dreaming in the dimensions that your most discouraging seasons trained you to fit within. What is ahead of you is not the modest, manageable version of your life that you have sometimes allowed yourself to hope for when you were afraid to want more. What is ahead of you is the version that was always intended, the version that the preparation was actually preparing you for, the version that the delay was protecting you for, the version that the isolation was developing you for. And I want you to begin to make space for that version, not by performing confidence you don't feel, not by pretending the doubt isn't there, but by beginning to treat your life like it matters in the way that it actually does, by beginning to take seriously the gifts that you have been minimizing, by beginning to pursue the direction of your assignment with the kind of intentionality that matches the weight of what you are carrying. The people who underestimated you gave you low expectations to live up to. But you do not answer to their expectations. You never have. And the sooner you stop allowing the memory of their dismissal to function as the ceiling of your ambition, the sooner you begin to inhabit the actual dimensions of your calling. Your calling does not fit within the imagination of someone who never believed in you. Your calling was not designed by committee. Your calling was designed by heaven in consultation with no one but the fullness of who you are and what the world needs that only you can bring. And heaven is not limited by what the people who dismissed you could see.
I want to close by telling you something that I need you to receive with your full heart, not just your intellect. You are closer than you think, not to perfection, not to a version of your life where everything works out and nothing is hard and you never question yourself again, but close to the moment where the things that have been hidden become visible, close to the encounter that change the trajectory, close to the conversation that opens the door, close the alignment that makes the next step clear in a way that the previous step never was. The preparation is not wasted. Not 1 year of it. Not one session. Not one prayer that felt like I went nowhere. Not one tear that felt like it was shed in vain. Not one night of wrestling. Not one morning of dragging yourself forward when everything in you want to say down. Every single bite of it was being collected, and what has been collected in you is a resource that is now ready to be released into the world. Your story is not over. That is the most important thing I can tell you. Not that the ending is certain, because the choices you make will shape how is it unfold. Not that the path is clear, because you will have to keep walking to discover it, but that the story is not over. The best chapters are not necessary the ones that come before. The chapter ahead of you, the one being written right now, the ones that will be written in the coming sessions of your life. Thus chapters are informed by everything that come before them, shaped by everything have become, and they are waiting to be written by someone who has finally stopped believing the understanding voice and started listening to the deeper voice, the one that has been speaking inside of you since the beginning, the one that told you this was not your ending, the one that refused to let you fully give up, even when giving up seemed like the only logical option, the one that kept the ember alive in the darkest of your winters. The voice was not confusion, the voice was not delusion, the voice was not wishful thinking. The voice was heaven telling you the truth about who you are before the rest of your life had a chance to show you. And now, you are standing at the place where the international reality being to become external reality, where the private preparation begins to produce public fruit, where the long work of becoming finally begins to meet the wider world that has been, without knowing it, waiting for exactly what you have to bring. The people who underestimate you would not see your real assignment, but it was never their job to see it. It was yours to carry it and to trust it and to keep walking toward it even when the carrying was exhausting and the trusting was difficult and the walking felt like it had not destination. You did all of that and it brought you here, and here is not where your story ends. Here is where it's finally begins to be told.